Does watercolouring scare you? Did you know that card making is a great place to start? And I'm going to tell you why. But first, I've got something fun to share with you. So I think Paul Rubens must have heard about my addiction to watercolouring on cards, and they reached out to me and they sent me this YouLan Artist Watercolouring 24 pan set to try. So as you can see, the packaging is a lot of fun, and the colours on this swatch here look really pretty. I am going to swatch the colours out and hang around because I'm going to share 3 different techniques with you how you can use watercolours on card designs. And I was really excited to see that there is a swatch included in this set, and it's on beautiful cardstock. It's actually glittery. I know I don't think you'll be able to see it in the video, but it's got glitter within the cardstock, seriously. It's so pretty. This set includes 24 solid half pan colours, and they're all individually wrapped. The pigment colours are written on the wrapping, but they are also noted on the actual swatch sheet as well. And it was really simple to remove the wrapping off the actual pan itself and just replace it back into the tin. They just snap back in. I highly recommend swatching out your watercolours. You can't tell from the pan exactly what the colour is, and I would also suggest to use the cardstock that you're going to typically use for painting on, and that way you'll know exactly how it's going to look. And I have to say, these colours are really pretty and easy to lay down. So why are greeting cards a really great place to start when you're learning to watercolour? To begin with, the surface area or the design area of a card is a lot smaller than, say, a canvas. And you don't need to use expensive watercolour paper. Typically, greeting cards are given and you expect someone to throw them away, so you don't have that permanency that you have with a canvas as well. It isn't going to end up on somebody's wall. And if you do make a mistake, it's literally just a piece of paper and you can throw it away and use that as part of your learning curve. I've got 3 techniques that I'm going to be sharing with you today, and if you're not really confident with colouring, stick around because I've got a really easy one that anyone can do coming up very soon. My first technique is to use heat embossing. One of the most difficult things for me when it came to playing with watercolours was the waiting time for the drying. Seriously, no one wants to watch paint dry. So a great tip to get used to using the paints and the watercolours and brushes is to actually use heat embossing. So I've stamped a big floral image here. You can stamp whatever images you have. Flowers are a great place to start because the petals don't have to be perfectly coloured. So variances within the colouring and with the watercolouring can look quite natural when it comes to the petals and leaves. So the heat embossed edges of the image create kind of a well for the colour. So typically if you're putting 2 different colours next to each other, like say a petal and a leaf, you would have to wait for each colour to dry before adding the one directly beside it, because the 2 wet colours will merge. It will seep through the cardstock and you'll end up with muddy colours, or the edges of your image won't be nice and crisp. So by having the heat embossing and that well, you can actually speed up the colouring process and have less mishaps with colours blending with each other unintentionally. I'm using a bit of a mix of wet on wet and some like dry colour strokes here. I do like to add layers of each colour, so sometimes I will mix a couple of different colours. I start with a very light layer and wait for that to dry before I add a second layer on top of the petal again. I do mix my colours on the palette, but one of the great things about having a pre-mixed colour palette such as these watercolour pans is if you're not confident to mix your own colours, then these pre-mixed colours work beautifully together. So if you are going to mix your own colours, you can use a colour wheel, and that can give you some direction about which colours are going to mix nicely and play nicely together. Or you can kind of test it on a piece of scrap cardstock. But I would recommend, if you are going to mix your own colours and you want to paint a large surface area, make more colour or blend more colour than you think you're going to need, because it's going to be very difficult to remix exactly the same colour. And that's where pre-mixed colours are perfect if you're a beginner watercolorist. So this first card actually took the longest out of all the 3 cards to paint today, and it does take time. If you're wanting to layer up the colours, you don't need to add as many layers as I have here. I do like to come in and add shading, but if you're just learning, simply just get the colours out, start painting and see how it goes. It is only paper. To add some depth to the petals, I came in with a blue kind of purple colour and came in just where the edges of the petals meet and focused in the centre of the flowers as well. On the leaves, to add some depth, I actually used some of the black paint in the set. And I didn't use very much at all, just a small amount, because you can always come back in and add more if you want to after. So some things you can do if you do have a mistake in a certain area of an image, you can easily use a coordinating die cut to cut the image out. You can also cut a portion of the image. You can layer some vellum over top and make it into like a subtle background. No one will ever know. One of the best things you can do for yourself is to actually just give it a try. It's a lot of fun to do. You don't need to have artist quality watercolors to achieve great results and that watercolor look on your cards. They are beautiful to use, so if you do have some or you do want to get some, make sure you use them. These ones are quite affordable, and I've been watching Lindsay, and I'll try and remember to link her YouTube channel below. I've been watching her for years and she loves these paints, so that's why I was really excited when Paul Rubens reached out to me, because I was very excited to see what these paints were like to actually use after hearing about them for all these years. I decided not to add too much to this card. I do like to add a lot of strong adhesive to any of my watercolor cardstock panels, just to make sure that they adhere nicely to the A2 card base. And I popped up a simple sentiment and added a little bit of sparkle. I used white embossing powder today, but you could use black if you wanted more of a dark outline. You could use a coloured pigment ink and emboss with clear embossing powder, or even gold or silver would have looked beautiful here. Alright, so we're coming into the second technique now, and this one's going to seem a little bit weird. We're going to be doing a splash of colour. I've chosen a stamp set here where the flower outline looks like it's a watercolour style flower with a very loose line edge. I'm holding the flowers against my A2 watercolour cardstock here and creating a basic design on the panel. This is going to be a very clean and simple design. So I've got the 2 main blooms and the stem, and I can remember in my mind roughly where they were on the panel of cardstock. Next, I lay down some clean water, and then I can just come in and use my leftover paint that's on the palette and drop that into the water. And this is the wet on wet technique again, and it will just magically spread out as it dries. I'm also doing a similar technique for the leaves, and I'm using some of the blue here to make them a little bit darker in places. If you didn't want your colours to mix, then you would wait till they're dry before adding the second layer. I wanted to mix these colours a little bit, so I did actually come in and add the orange, or that yellowy orange colour, while the paint was still wet. But it's personal choice. And one thing to be aware is that once the paint dries, it will be much lighter. Look at this. So I did come in and add another layer of paint over top, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Looking back now, I kind of like the pale colours, and I think it would have looked really pretty had I just stamped over those colours. And I just want to show you a little quick tip here. If your panel is warped, you can run it through your die cutting machine just with a piece of copy paper wrapped around it to protect it, and that will help flatten the watercolor cardstock out. So you might be thinking, why didn't she stamp the image first and then colour it? It'd be much easier. Of course it would. But what happens when I do it that way is I actually start colouring in the lines. I can't help myself. So if I want a real loose look, then I will actually do it this way. But if you do stamp first, make sure that you use pigment ink or something that's compatible with watercolours, and you may even need to heat set it. And a stamp positioning tool here is your friend, because you can restamp on the watercolour cardstock if you need to. So this loose watercolour style image is perfect for this technique, but have a look at your stash. I've also used regular sort of styled flowers. It doesn't have to be loose. It still looks great done with using this same technique. You can also use a modern, more graphic style of image. That looks amazing. And as promised, I have my final technique here, which anyone can do. I promise anyone can do this technique. We're going to be using die cut images. Simply grab a panel of watercolor cardstock. You can either use a wet on wet technique, or you can just paint color on and create basically a piece of your own design paper. I'm using leftover paint that's on the palette and picking up a little bit of extra color because I wanted to use analogous colors here. And that just means that I've chosen colors that sit beside each other on the color wheel. So I know that these colors are going to mix well together without creating a muddy look. I've gone for the blues and greens here, and I'm adding them directly to the panel with quite a bit of water, and I'm not waiting for them to dry in between because I do want the colors to mix. If I wanted to add more layers, then I could wait for the panel to dry and then add bolder layers and do it that way. So this gives me a watercolor look that I can die cut my images from. You do need to wait for the panel to dry before you die cut. I thought this color panel would be perfect with some leaves, and you can have a look through your stash. There are a lot of leaf dies that come with flower sets. You could even hand cut leaves with a pair of scissors, draw some on with a pencil if you wanted to. You could draw it on the reverse side. You have lots of options. But make sure that the panel's dry before you do the die cutting. You can actually speed up the process with a heat tool if you have one. Just be aware not to hold the heat tool onto the actual panel for too long if you've only got the high set heating. This is going to give me a dimensional background because I'm going to use these leaves to create a raised background on a panel to pop up on a card. So I want a nice bold sentiment today. So I've chosen to do some heat embossing and some die cutting and using some black and white cardstock. All right, so I've got a panel of cardstock. I'm going to work out roughly how the leaves are going to sit on the panel before I adhere them down. I make sure that I hang some of the leaves over the edge of the panel, and that's just going to make it look like they are meant to be there when I cut them away. You'll see what I mean in a moment. I'm adhering them with some liquid glue because I know that's got a good strong hold, and it gives me a few seconds if I do need to move them around. And then once I've got all the leaves laid down, then I can just simply flip my panel over and cut away the edges of the leaves. This makes it almost look like it's a continuous piece of design paper, but it also gives that dimensional element because the leaves are actually popped up slightly on the front of the card. Don't throw away any of those edge pieces that you've cut. You can actually use them to fill in some of the gaps. So check out your die cut images and see what you've got. It doesn't have to be single images. You can actually do the same technique using cover dies, which could be an image or even a pattern. These paints are beautiful to use and really pretty colours. I hope I've given you some inspiration to try some watercolouring on your card designs. It doesn't have to be complicated. Anyone can do this. All together now, we've got the first technique, which was heat embossing, which created the wells so that we could watercolour within those. The second technique was a splash of colour, where I kind of reversed it and did the stamping after. Gives it that real loose look. And final technique, which anyone can do, is to use watercolours to create your own design paper and then use it with some die cut images. Let me know in the comments below which one's your favourite today, and if you've enjoyed these cards and this style of video. I'm so appreciative that you're here. If you click the like button and subscribe, that'd be amazing. And I've got 2 more watercolour videos for you right here.